repetition is reputation. It is so easy to want to go on to the next message, the next campaign, the next thing. But I think the brands, and especially I think right now in an increasingly fragmented space and so many messages going to the consumer, that repetition of your brand, your branding, your brand elements, your key message is really, really important.
Hi, before we get to this week's podcast, I'd like to tell you that Automated Creative are releasing a book called How to Make It in Marketing, Volume 1. It is a collection of the best marketing career advice we've had from over 200 episodes of the Shiny New Object podcast. You'll hear from some of the biggest, brightest and best names in the industry telling you how to grow your career. You can reserve yourself a copy at this URL. So get your pens out. It's bit.ly, so bit.ly/make it in marketing. So that's bit.ly/make it in marketing. But the make it in marketing bit is in capital letters. So bit.ly/lowercase and the rest is make it in marketing, uppercase. I think you should get your heads around that. And enjoy. It's a great read. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a weekly podcast about the future of the marketing and advertising industries. And every week I'm joined by one of its leaders to help us dig deeper into the future that they think is almost certainly going to happen. So this week is no different. I'm on a call with John Solomon, who is the CMO of Therabody. John, for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do, could you give us a bit of background?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. Big fan of the podcast. Yeah. And, my background, born and raised in California, but in kind of amongst the Silicon Valley booms and busts, really love technology. But ultimately found my way, kind of fast forward, but found my way ultimately into marketing after college. And I started agency side. Worked at AKQA, and then eventually went on to always wanted to go on the brand side. I had an awesome clients at Anheuser-Busch at the time, and I said, I kind of want to be like them. I want to be on the side of making some of these decisions, making some of these calls. So that took me ultimately to Beats by Dre. And then 2 weeks after starting, Apple acquired Beats by Dre. I stayed on Beats for about 4.5 years and kind of left us alone, especially on the marketing side. And then ultimately the Apple side of things came calling, and had an opportunity to go on the Apple side and work within Marcom there, and did that for a number of years. And then Therabody reached out. I was super passionate about the product they'd created. I'm a huge cyclist. And got to talk to them, and I really loved the time I had at Beats. I love that size of company where it's a bit chaotic, and they're trying to figure out how to scale and go international. And so I really wanted to get back into a company kind of that size and in a similar state. So I decided to leave Apple after almost 8 years and jump back into a little bit more of the entrepreneurial startup space. And I've been CMO and leading a marketing organization for just over 1.5 years.
Well, John, that's quite the CV. I'm very envious. I'm sure many people will be, but I'm curious to know, kind of throughout that career, taking off some very, very big names, if not the biggest, what is the most useful thing that you've bought for work with your own money?
The most useful thing. So I'm going to caveat this. This is going to sound a little bit corny and a little bit self-serving. But before I started at Therabody, I actually, during the pandemic, bought a Theragun. And it was, having a lot of sitting at the computer, having a lot of stress, having a lot of knots while I'm working, being a new father, having to pick up a baby, getting a bit older now, just dealing with aches and pains. And I say that because, yes, it is a bit self-serving, because that is the product that I sell, amongst other products. But ultimately, I really believe that you have to market what you're passionate about, and you have to market products that you love. So ultimately, that was a product that I had bought. It really had impact on my life. It really changed how I've moved. And when that company came calling, I was really, really drawn to it. And I think that that's really, really important in today's marketing. So I want to make the turn to make it a little bit, not just purely self-serving, but also to, as a tip out there, because I was also a massive Apple fanboy back in the day, as I said, growing up in the Bay Area. So I really think that being super passionate about your products and loving them and knowing everything about them is absolutely key to a marketer. So that has helped me both in my personal life, and I believe has also helped me to find the role I'm at right now.
Wow, John. Wow.
How was that?
The thing that really stuck out to me there was the being a young father thing. I am a young father. Oh, I should say I'm not particularly young, but my daughter is very young. And the thought of having a Theragun to help through some of those more painful carrying moments retrospectively seems like a very good idea. So thanks for sharing that story. So you've given a great plug to the company with a great personal recommendation. So congrats on that. So what we're going to do now is move over to specifically to marketing advice. So what is that marketing tip that you give your team or your friends or your followers most often that stood you in good stead?
Yeah. So my tip is from a great friend and former colleague of mine by the name of Cheryl Caligari, who ran Beats Europe when we were working together. And I'll always remember that she would say, repetition is reputation. And if there's one thing in marketing that I always go back and tell people is repetition is reputation. It is so easy to want to go on to the next message, the next campaign, the next thing. As a marketer, we always want to create new things. It's a very creative function. But I think the brands, and especially I think right now, in an increasingly fragmented space and so many messages going to the consumer, that repetition of your brand, your branding, your brand elements, your key message is really, really important. This came up specifically when we were developing the campaign. Some people may remember, called Straight Out Of, and it was to support Dr. Dre's obviously momentous historical biopic around Straight Outta Compton. And we were developing a campaign in support of that, given he was a founder of Beats, and Beats had a big role. And so with that, we created basically Straight Out of Blank. And it was all about where you're repping, where you're from. And people took that and did all sorts of fun things with it, as we created a meme generator and everything. But the key thing we did, we had that iconic lockup. It was the same thing. No matter if you saw Serena Williams post it, LeBron James, or if you saw a consumer doing it through our own generator, it was a thing that everyone saw around the world. I still walk down the street and I still see Straight Out Of memes sweatshirts, and it's the exact same iconic look and feel that was created, 8-9 years ago. And I just think that really, really taught me. And then obviously going to Apple, where everything is about repeating and consistency over and over and over again. From the YouTube thumbnail all the way to the packaging to the ad and every touch point that we sweat. And I think that's something I always go back to over and over and over again. And it's funny, I actually, my wife, who's in marketing, works at SoundCloud. She was asking what you're going to say, and I had said it to her, and she's like, "Wow, I've never actually heard you say that. I'm going to start using that." So I think it's a great thing. I think we forget it a lot, but that's something I just go back to over and over again.
It's so nice and short, isn't it? Repetition is reputation. But the thing I've sketched down here, they'll push back on you slightly. When you say repetition is recognition, because reputation is what other people say about you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Whereas, you go, oh, this iPhone's great. It's so cool. Whereas if you just have the same iPhone picture poster in the same place in Old Street year after year after years, which seems to be their strategy for outdoor, that's recognition, right?
Yeah.
Or have I missed the point?
Yeah, I think you're look 100%. I think I think it's kind of that, but it's also going back to what are the values too behind that you're standing for, right? And I think that well, it might, for example, shot an iPhone. Is a campaign that's run for many years, right? And the core essence of it is the fact that it's the ultimate platform to celebrate what people have done, taken with their iPhones, right? That is the overarching idea that never wavers from that. But it can be people that are shooting animals. It could be people that are shooting musicians on tour. It could be people, they're able to take that and go in so many different directions with it. But at the same time, that's what it was known for. And I think that, and ultimately over time, it was known for, hey, speeds and feeds aside, this is known as a product that can take amazing pictures from anybody. And I think that's where did not waver from it. So yes, not the same thing, not exactly the same thing over time, but I do think that's how you build an important reputation as a brand. Is that repetition, and the bigger point is sticking with things, and you can, especially when you have a strong platform for your brand, there's all sorts of different ways you can go in and dimensionalize it for years and years and years to come.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we're at the point we're going to talk about your shiny new object. And when you told me this, I thought, yes, I really want to know the answer to this. Your shiny new object is getting to great work in amongst global chaos, which is, in my estimation, is probably the same problem that every CMO's got. But I'm curious to know why you've chosen that as your shiny new object, and what is it specifically to you?
Sure. As we started to think about this, and I was listening to some of your recent podcasts, I said, man, and I think I said this to you earlier, like, coming later in the series, right? Like, people have given away a lot of the modern, I think, tricks and books and theory, right? I mean, how many people have talked about, Byron Sharp and how brands grow? How many people have talked about Bennett and Field? And I think that the hardest part right now for a marketer is, how do you take this, I think, amazing theory, evidence-backed marketing that we all are starting to gravitate towards, and how do you actually execute on it amongst some massive changes going on in the world? And I think as all of us, marketers and consumers, I don't think we've realized how much things have changed. I mean, I think I'm kind of break this into kind of three key areas. One is just mega consumer trends, right? If we look at the fact that people are remote work, and where people are starting their places of work and their interaction. We look at the challenge around inflation. We look even at people, and especially in my category, changing behaviors around personal health. People are starting to take control of their own health. I was just looking at a study that physical activity is growing most amongst 65 plus year olds, right? So we're talking about big changes with our consumers, right? Then we talk about business headwinds, right? And we all look at the headlines. We all know that there's, threats of recession. We know there's massive layoffs that we're all reading about. And more importantly than ever, I think marketing budgets are getting scrutinized, and people are saying people are having to answer for things that they potentially haven't had the answer for before. So I think there's massive headwinds from a business and needing to show profitability, needing to talk more about margins, need to talk about really being scrutinized. And I think on top of it, and I didn't want to be the person that comes in and says, my shiny new object is AI, because I think that's probably what a lot of people would say right now. But the reality is we have a lot of quickly changing tech trends. AI is definitely something that is going to have massive impacts for us down the road. We had last year was blockchain and Web3. We've had rise of things like TikTok, platform changes. So I just look at this and I say, this is a lot of change very quickly. And I don't believe in my career I've seen really things change this quickly. On the flip side of that, I think what I tell my team is it's a massive opportunity, because when things are going well, it's easy to be a marketer. When things are going up to the right, money is flowing freely. Consumers are just buying, sitting at home during COVID. But now this is really, I think people are going to learn a lot and become great marketers because of it. And how I've thought about approaching it, and I don't quite have the answer, because I think it's a massive topic. But there are kind of three ways I am thinking about dealing with each of those items. One is, I think that the fact that we have, and at least for me, a more distributed workforce is a huge opportunity for us to get a more diverse set of consumer insights. Right? I now have a team that is not just sitting in LA, where our headquarters are, and potentially being in a bit of a bubble. I have people in Sacramento and Portland, New York, Boston, Spain, Italy, China. We have the ability, I think, to get a lot of great insights that are sometimes out of our own filter bubble. I personally have spent a lot of time now up in Montana. My wife and I love it up there. And when I go into Walmart, when I go into Costco, when I go to Best Buy, it's a very, very different world than if you were to do that in LA. So I think we have a huge ability to leverage the fact that people are more remote and around the world, or potentially around the country, to get better insights and then come back together and learn from that. So that's one way I'm kind of thinking about a more how you start thinking about these macro trends and staying on top of it. I think for the second thing is we're talking about the business headwinds. I think it's key. One big key thing, and I think people talk about this before, is building out relationships with your sales team, CFO, CEO, to ensure alignment on strategy and measurement. I think that's something that you have to work hand in hand, have to work closely together on that to really understand what are we trying to accomplish. Because as the third point, as there's so many new shiny objects, and as I always say too, there are no small projects. So I think it's always a willingness to want to try and go after and do all these things, especially for a business our size. It is very, very challenging to lose focus. And I think as we're looking at, having to justify more, potentially having to do more with less, I think usually teams are trying to do too much, and they overestimate what a team can accomplish in a year. So I think that we need to be careful about all the shiny objects, and careful of chasing a lot of those things. Focus on a few key things, maybe take a few bets, maybe do a few experiments. But I think focus is really, really important. And that's one thing I've been really talking about with the team, because when we look at our year-long calendar, I think everyone's like, yeah, I think we can do this. And now we're already into March, and we're like, okay, things maybe take a little bit longer. Things are a little bit harder. We have to get more weight to get some more insights. We have a distributed team. Again, some of those things are challenges. We need to use as opportunities. But I really think that this third thing is focus, and what can we actually accomplish in a given year. And so I'm really focused on scaling back. So that was a lot. I'm sure you have some kind of questions, but I do think it is a just crazy environment right now. And I think sometimes we don't even stop to assess it and what the impacts are to both teams and how we should be marketing.
I'm curious to know a little bit more about I think it was your third point. You didn't label them specifically, so I might get getting this wrong. But you talk about AI and the quickly changing tech trends, and
Yes.
And last year it was blockchain and Web3 and TikTok, and now everyone's got bored of that and everyone's talking about ChatGPT. So I'm curious to know what do you think the opportunity is with AI, and how are you going to approach it?
It's a great question. I don't know if there's some fascinating reading that Ben Thompson's done. I was listening to last night about his interactions with Sydney and in Bing, and I would encourage everyone to go back and look at that. He had a 2-hour conversation with the AI, and just, I mean, it's like we're living in the movie Her, which I would also encourage people to go back and rewatch. Look, I think even more than blockchain and Web3, it's going to be a bigger implications. I think it's going to have huge implications to marketing. You even seeing, some of the things Facebook's trying to do to get around their challenges they have with tracking, and they're starting to have it a lot more AI based, and you have to turn over your creative so it can actually, edit on your behalf to optimize. I think it's going to be a great tool for us to automate certain things. And I think there's certain tasks that we will not have to do. And I think it'll become more of an assistant. And it will really help us in a lot of ways. So I'm excited about that. I think that it's not necessarily going to take the place of marketing. And I think that, or at least I guess I hope not for all of us. But I think it'll be a great companion tool. I think it'll be, there's stuff that we can do. There's stuff that it's going to help us do with its computing power and certain tasks. And I think there's things that will just change the nature of work. But it's really, really early. It's very early days. If you started to see how people have been able to poke at it, people have been able to, even now Microsoft has gone and clamped down on what the AI will do. You're going to see all sorts of copycats. I would go to say, I'll tell my team, I think it's going to be some fundamental change, but let's not get too distracted with it right away. Like, let's wait and see how this is going to play out. Because I think this is something that's going to take a while for us to figure out. I think we should all be aware. I think we should all educate ourselves, but it's very, very early days. And I think as we saw with the excitement around Web3 and NFTs, and everyone raced into that, and I think that, again, it's easy to get distracted, especially when we need to really focus. So I'm watching it, I'm learning it. I love it intellectually to understand it, but I don't think us as a team are going to go out and start dramatically chasing after it this year. I think it'll be a bit of a wait and see.
Yeah, my view is that it comes back to Cheryl's quote from before: repetition is reputation, or recognition, wherever you want.
Yeah.
Like, does this new technology allow that to happen better, faster, quicker, or cheaper?
Yeah.
And it's across all of your trends, whether it's the kind of mega consumer trends, is it remote work? Okay, well, how does that improve? Repetition is reputation, and I think everything you've said, you've kind of given us a kind of list of worries of a CMO, and it's been fascinating to hear all of those things sort of laid out in such detail. And I really appreciate you sharing your view of the world as you see it, and how we can all try to do great work in what you've rightly pointed out is great chaos. So, John, if someone wanted to get in touch with you to discuss any of this stuff, I know your LinkedIn box is very full, as we discussed before the show, but where is the right place to reach out to you, and what makes the perfect outreach message to John?
Yeah, I think great question. Again, I do enjoy the conversation. I'm always happy. I'd love to try and make time for people to chat more about any of these topics. LinkedIn is probably the best thing right now. I do feel like there's so many different platforms, and from work being, Slack to email to social networks and everything. So I would say LinkedIn. I think the being very tangible with your request. I get a lot of, hey, I'd love to chat, or hey, I'd love to just, pick your brain. time is the precious commodity for all of us. So I think if it's, hey, I would love 15 minutes. I'd love to discuss this topic. Here are 4 or 5 times that I'm available. Whatever you can do to get someone to respond quick, to say, yes, this works, make it easy, because there's always a lot going on. And as I talked about, there's so many different distractions these days, and so many different communication channels. So, and then the other thing I would say is, I always go back to is the squeaky wheel, right? Don't be, at some point you gotta, if they're not getting a response, but a lot of times, people are well-intentioned, they'd love to respond. So maybe, a few follow-ups, a few nudges. Don't take it personally if you don't hear back right away, or if they follow up and then disappear. But at some point, it might not work out and for them at that moment. So I would kind of stay at it as well.
John, thank you so much for your time.
Tom, really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much as well.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.